really, I just wanted to share some of the things. I know those of you that were in the plenary just before lunch may have heard a bit of this because we were discussing it, but one of the things we've been talking about is deliberately keeping some of the really good things that have happened. And we think that it's going to take some effort rather than that we're going to have to do it by design, rather than just hoping people will take that on board. This is a very, very quick overview, and there is a point to the context, so I'm not just rambling on. I'm originally from a business school, and 20 years ago, I was an e-learning teaching fellow, but obviously that separation now really shouldn't exist, although I think from some of the discussions and the way that we've talked about moving online and the education and the learning technologists, it probably does more than we'd like. And so I'm coming at this from a very particular perspective, I will admit that. And just a quick reminder, this is a car. And this is something I used to share with the students, really, to make them think about this, because I think it's really easy to forget. I remember my grandmother telling me when she went to the village green to see the first car that was in the village. And, you know, that's relatively recently. And I was without my car for a little while, and I thought I'd got my arm chopped off. You know, would become that reliant on these sorts of things without realizing it. My mum told me that when she was little, they went next door to watch the Queen's coronation because people didn't have a telly then, you know, only the posh ones had tellies. I think most people now would think that as a necessity as they set up a home rather than a luxury. And so it goes on. And now we've got the World Wide Web, and I think the same thing's happening. It's become ubiquitous, and there are certain expectations around it in terms of learning and teaching. And those of you that were in the talk earlier would have heard me say this, but I think it's worth reiterating for those that weren't. Because of my sort of commercial background before I came into academia, one of the things I think we will have is this bit of a limbo for a while where students expect to be able to go to the lecture and watch it online if they want to, because it will affect the perceptions of our offer to them. But because this is what happened, you know, if you were with British Gas, you'd expect to see your bill online, but you always wanted the paper one as well. Most people over the last sort of 15 years have become comfortable with just having their bills, you know, sent online. They don't expect a paper one. But there was that awful period for companies where they had to spend a lot of money making sure people could see the bills online, which for years they never looked at. Until this adoption of actually, you know, being comfortable with behaving in that way. And I do think for a while, universities are probably with students going to see some of this. Their perception will be, well, if it's not online, you can't be, you know, you're not looking after students. But they'll still expect the on-campus experience and to be able to do either or, which, okay, if you're only recording the lecture and putting it up, but I wonder whether students might actually want other things, you know, that a properly designed online offer and a lecture. And as we all know, the designs of those things, you know, are potentially very different. So, you know, what next for HE? And I'm really happy to open this question up because, you know, I've got people in the room here who've probably given this more thought than me. I mean, I think when we look at artificial intelligence, we're bringing some of that into our annual learning and teaching conference. We're actually bringing in, for those of you who don't know, and there's no reason you should know, NTU are doing a lot of work with the college at Mansfield as an outreach basis, because it's been identified as an area for development. And they have got the most marvellous medical sort of virtual reality gizmos over there that we are going to showcase. And I think we're thinking that there may well be more of this. I was at Derby, and this was very much in their thinking a long time ago. And I think they would admit they've spent money on things that didn't go forward, but they were willing to give it a try. Okay, so what a year. most of us are sort of in that academic practice, supporting learning and teaching, educational development role. And, we can look at this from sort of three aspects, really. The individual, so, it's brilliant that it might have moved my individual teaching on or my skills on. And we've got many academic colleagues who are very proud of themselves for having gone into this world, even if, pedagogically awkward or perhaps not ideally, but the fact that they've actually ventured into an online world, they're extremely proud of themselves for, and so are we actually, because it's taken them a huge effort to do this. We've built a community around this. We have the Trent Institute of Learning and Teaching, which is a university-wide umbrella that I look after as part of my remit. And we've actually put Tilt online. And this actually is absolutely a deliberate thing that we will not move back on. It has been fantastic. We have had more participation in it than we've ever had. Geographically, we've got campuses all over the place. We've started to invite our international partners to contribute. We've got spotlights, we've got themes, we've got all sorts of different ways of sharing. People are sharing actively in that platform without us. They're talking to each other without us. That real community sense of helping each other has really flourished there. And we absolutely want to keep that. And we will be taking deliberate steps to make sure, well, we'll be very mindful. We don't want to, there's that balance, isn't there? We don't want to interfere and kill it, but we don't want it to stop either. And then there's the institutional, sort of, we've got the institutional remit to look at. And I think looking from that institutional remit, we really have got our lessons are the absolute dedication of our staff, I think NTU has got a culture of that, so I think we're quite fortunate in that respect. The fact that necessity is the mother of invention, and we don't want another pandemic, but it has really come to some fantastic ways of assessment that have really come out of the box, and people have really given some thought to, as we would want them to, in terms of what are they actually assessing. And they've worked very closely with people in the Centre for Academic Development and Quality around what these things might look like. And the lesson that we have really learned is that flexibility is the key in our ways of working. And that actually is going to apply to us actually as we move back onto campus. So we know we've had this forced shift in practice, and we all know that was forced. It was panic initially, and I'm sure we all know what sense of level of panic that was. But we have had this extremely positive change in attitude to using and embedding online assets, I think, into things moving forward. And, it is a government driver for the institution, the way that that we use technology with students and accessibility and things like that. And so, we know that some of our key targets are being met. And like I said to you, those that were in the session earlier, our 4-year plan for bringing in more technology and this blended learning and issues like this, our 4-year plan, the team will tell you, more or less happened in 4 months. I'm not saying, the quality of whatever we think we've got there over the year, so I wouldn't vouch for it to, and there's more to do, there's absolutely more to do. But that team, I'm surprised they're still standing, actually, if I'm honest. And so we had quite a discussion about this a little while ago, actually, because as executives do, those of you that have worked with, in this type of thing, we were asked quite a while ago to be extremely explicit as a leadership team in our department, what we wanted to keep and what we were going to do, what practice we were absolutely changing. And that includes the way that we work with each other, as well as across the institution. And so we do think that we want to take advantage of this way that delivering teaching and learning happens. And as David Baum said earlier, these two things aren't necessarily the same. The way that we deliver teaching and the way that learning happens, because we've had extreme, as I'm sure you all have, examples across the institution, how different subject areas have handled this and what arrangements they've put in place. And I've had members of staff in tears over really unrealistic student expectations. One said to me a short while ago, and she was in tears, she said, you know, her when they'd moved back on campus because it was a practical subject, what had happened was the students weren't coming to the lectures and expected it now to be online in the format that she was doing it in before. So not just, and she was, you know, she's that conscientious, she'd redesigned it and put it online, which was she's a new member of staff, so it was a bit of a lesson. So I thought this perhaps is one thing that might be interesting, and I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Who decides what we don't want to let go of in your institutions? Because we might all lovely say the students, but it's this, you know, but if executives say, well, this is going to cost too much, who do you get a sense in your institutions might be the deciders of what we don't want to let go of? Because some of the things we don't want to let go of have got cost implications. Any ideas? Any thoughts? Any of you already discussed this in your units? No?
We haven't discussed it as such. I think what we do agree on is that a bit like the student said this morning, and what Dylan said, is that this is a great opportunity, and we don't think we want to go back to whatever normal was, you know. But what we keep, well, that's the big discussion that we're having at the minute. As I really agree with your point, Sandy, that people want both. Students, if you ask students, they want the convenience of both. Of course, how the utilities got around that is they started charging you if you wanted the paper bill. You know.
Yes, some do, but I think they've all dropped that now. But you know, but there is this changing. It was very uncomfortable for a while, the expectations versus the reality. You know, and that was you know, obviously in a different arena, but I agree with it. So who decides? Because if the students say, well, actually, we'd like to be able to come to the lecture if we want to, we don't think just recording the lecture is good enough anymore. You know, we actually like to be able to engage. You know, maybe we say to students, well, you have to engage at the beginning, you know, opt at the beginning how you want to engage, but that's twice as much work for an academic colleague. And I think for me, the interesting thing is who decides, because, yeah, you know, but yeah, so if any of you have any thoughts on this afterwards, I'm really, I would really welcome an email. You know, if you're sort of starting to get into these discussions, it would be really interesting, I think, because there are the pressures of student choice, student demand, student voice, and the, you know, the expectations of what we can perhaps actually do, I would say.